Hello everyone and welcome in another session of AGC webinars. My name is Suzana Ayeti and I'm the AGC Portfolio Marketing Manager and your host for today. As always, I'm delighted to have you all here with us. Today's topic is building a food safety culture into the organization. The goal of this webinar is to focus participants in cultural transformation tools, also known as CTT, that can help create a value-driven organization. To tell us more about it, joining us is David Bowe, and he's the founder and principal consultant of Food Safety Navigator and has employed over 36 years of food safety management and 18 years in healthcare. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, feel free to write them in the question box in the right-hand control panel. Please, Mr. Larry, you may start the presentation.
Good day, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak to PEC Group and relating to building a culture of food safety. As Susan has said, my name is Larry Bowe, and I'm your presenter today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come to this particular stage, a global stage. And if I could just take a minute to sort of reflect on the fact that it is a result of this global stage that food safety and a food safety culture has taken such a dramatic change. There was a day when all we needed to do was to focus on our individual food safety departments and policies and procedures that ensured that we were compliant. But today it is a great deal more. There is an expectancy, not just the fact that we're in business, not just the fact that we have a food service organization. There is an expectancy of quality, and that is also driven by our customers who are demanding health and safety, and when we can't deliver that, then they will go to or migrate to those organizations that can deliver that result. So as we look at this quality assurance process, yes, it is a process, but it also is an insurance. Which must clearly communicate to every single employee, every single person that is within that organization. And when we talk about global food safety, that is one of the key aspects of being able to understand why it is that we often miss the mark when it comes to a culture of food safety versus a food safety program. And we're going to talk about that expectancy. We're going to talk about the commitment to service and quality, and lastly, compliance. Most of the time people, when they put together food safety programs, it is based on them meeting basic regulations. But it's more than that today. Our culture of food safety is going to offer the assurance and the expectancy for every single team member. And so when we say every single team member, we're also focusing on the fact that that the food service department no longer is the lead, no longer is the department that's running the process. So when you look at the definition here, culture of food safety is built on a set of shared values that operators and their staff follow to proceed and provide food in a safe manner. But it's not just about food, it's not just about quality of the product anymore. It's about maintaining a food safety culture that the operator and his staff, they know the risk. And when we talk about know the risk, there are some of the things that my background primarily is healthcare food service. And there are many days when we'll deliver trays and carts to the floor and the resident's not ready to drink that milk. And so the milk oftentimes sits on the counter, sometimes for several hours. If there is not someone within that organization, it could be a nurse, it could be a doctor, it can be a nursing assistant that knows the risk of that carton of milk sitting there. So we're going to, as we get into our conversation today, we're going to talk about direct and indirect messaging. And I tell you that the key to developing a culture of food safety that transform your organization is everybody knowing the risk, knowing why and how to manage the risk and why it's so important, and manage those risks in a way that will allow everybody to know their role, their place in this whole process. So when we look to put together a culture of food safety, every organization is going to have its own strategy. And so when I start to focus on, when I say organization, I'm believing that we have here different organizations, different individuals, different types of organizations. You're not just food service individuals anymore. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the strategy of the overall organization with a good food safety culture is that it's individualized. It's not departmentalized anymore. It's individualized to enact practices that represent the shared values and point out where others may fail. And so we're going to talk about later, when we talk about failure, failure does not mean that someone got it wrong. It means that there's an opportunity for us to make corrections. And when I say make corrections, we're talking about by using the variety of tools and consequences and incentives and that business can demonstrate to their staff and to their customers that they are aware. And so one of the things of a food safety culture is no different than all the many representations that is on this webinar today. Every single one of us come from different cultures. Every one of us have different values. So those that live and reside and operate within that culture, those are the ones that must focus on the awareness of what food safety means to us, whether it be as a CNA or a doctor or a nurse or a dietitian. Food safety is important to the overall organization in a food safety culture. And so sometimes we hear this thing about food safety culture so much, we get to the point where it becomes a mystery. But today I'm hoping that we can uncover that food safety culture is not a mystery. One of the things you're going to hear from me today, that if you are just going by traditional policy procedures, training your staff, that process in a food safety culture only represents 30% of the overall success of a strategy when it comes to enacting a food safety culture. The other 70% comes from other individuals and how they relate to your policies and procedures. So as we focus on this process, we want to create a balance. This balance between management and staff empowerment, and how to strike the thinking process of doing this along with the management process. We're talking about the aim is to build messaging through events, turning success from action into action, focusing managers on mastering the 5 basics of an operation. And so what I want you to be able to see here is all this talking that we're talking, we haven't even gotten to the basics of policy procedures and all those other things that managers manage. But more importantly, there is a balance that the manager, administration, your quality assurance team must have. And this balance, I apologize, it establishes the organization's objectives and priorities. It focuses on service as an outcome. You can, again, talk all you want about how great the food is, but when it gets to the customer, it doesn't have that proper balance. It doesn't have what it is that will make that meal successful. The outcome is that, especially in healthcare environments, that we want to make our residents, we want to make our patients, we want to make our customers more healthier. They're coming to us and they're looking to us with that balance. They want to know what it is that they can have and what they can't have. But when they ask that question, they want to know that the organization values and objectives, that there's a difference as to why I'm going to choose this organization, and because the culture of food safety, and we're going to talk a little later about how the word food safety is synonymous with service, you know, and then we would have to motivate our staff and communicate with our staff around these events that center around our values. And so as we continue to focus on how to measure the performance. And when we talk about measuring performance, we're not talking about just XYZ department or XYZ employee, whether they pass the test or fail the test. We're going to talk about quarterly events, outcomes that will focus us on the outcome, and the outcome is a culture of food safety. It's no longer whether we pass or fail. It's now, have we transformed that organization into that organization that represents that culture that we're promoting. And so it'll come clearer. But what I want you to be able to see and really get out of this, the webinar that we're doing today, is we are no longer just the food service department. We're allied health professionals. Together we range from technical and support staff members made up to deliver indirect and direct care, rehabilitation department, treatment, diagnosis, health improvement. We're talking about surveyors. We're talking about all different aspects. This is what makes up a culture of food safety. And even as a food service manager, one of the reasons why I have become so versed in this process is I had to get out of my bubble. I am not just a food service department. I had to take the message to people that didn't go to college like I did. So as we focus on that, we must focus on service as a standard and then recognize that we all have limitations. But then the limitations will focus on whether we meet regulations. So now who are we? We are not just dietary and nutrition. We are rehab. We are health systems. We are dietitians. I like the idea that a lot of the people that follow me now on my LinkedIn site, they actually are lab technicians. They are other professionals. They don't have a food background. They might have a science background. But all these things are now what it takes to create a culture of food safety. It is not just me. It's a team. And when we say team, we're not just talking about food service. We're talking about the nursing department. If you are a part of a health organization, if you're not part of a health organization, there are allied groups that come to us and want to know how can we make the culture of food safety more effective. It's administration, it's management, it's all of us coming together. So as we focus on this, one of the things that we want to be able to do this in this polling process, you see here there's a poll and you can participate if you have a device, your phone. If you go to that website, you'll be able to identify whether you are administration or clinical officer, whether you are nursing, which is direct and indirect care, whether you are a environmental health official, including inspection agencies, whether you are a medical or laboratory scientist or a social worker or a therapy department. And notice out of all of these, only 6 of these represent hospitality or food service workers. And again, so when we talk about, as we go into this process of recognizing who we are as a culture of food safety, we are no longer just the food service department. And again, I want you to get used to this process, so I'm not going to wait. So as I focus on this, if you have gone to your device and chosen which one of these are you, we will be able to get a quick survey of the types of individuals that make up this body in this webinar, first of all, and then we can get a sense and an idea of, when we talk about a food safety culture, what types of individuals does it take to create a food safety culture. So this is when we talk about transformation of a culture of food safety, messaging by far is what makes the organization the culture of food safety. And when we talk about messaging, we're going to talk about formal messaging, but we're also going to talk about informal messaging. And when I finish this process, we're going to settle in on the fact that informal messaging is really which represents 70% of the culture of food safety. I'm going to say that again. So informal messaging, I'm going to show you the graphs, only represent 30% of you achieving a culture of food safety. It is the informal messaging that actually encompasses the greater messaging, the greater part of being able to achieve a culture of food safety. So when we talk about the formal messaging, we talk about policies, procedures, and processes. And so we're going to talk about the difference. And, you know, again, this webinar is not about policies, it's not about procedures, it's not about process, it's about the message of the transformation of a culture to a culture of food safety. So management role is to institute and serve as a teacher, as a monitor, applying the corrective actions as needed when it comes to policies and procedures. Corrective actions should not be viewed as discipline. So let me say that again. Corrective action should not be viewed as discipline. Corrective action applies to the deviation to the organization's values. Corrective action apply to deviations in that organization's values, policies and procedures, and processes. So when we talk about the 3 Ps, that is one of the first tools that we're going to identify in developing a culture of food safety. Policies, procedures, and processes serve as the foundation, as the guide to that organization. So the formal messaging relating to a clear policy, it basically focuses on the fact that that administration and management, and as a junior manager, I've come through the ranks, and a lot of times I've been in the organizations where the manager, the food service manager, certified food service manager is required, and they are held responsible for when that department fails. But when we talk about clear policy, we're talking about policies that come from and through the food service department, but they are not established by the food service department. The messaging is established through administration, excuse me. So the 3 Ps, when we look at this tool, it serves as the guide to the foundation of that organization. So it is true that clear policies should come from the director of the food service department, but it should focus on the messaging as it relates to, in this particular case, handling potentially hazardous foods. And so when we talk about handling potentially hazardous foods, we're not just talking about how to receive, we're talking about once that food also gets on the floor, it's still potentially hazardous, how to handle it. So the messaging also must focus on clear process. So when we talk about clear process, we're wanting to be able to focus on the fact that no matter who it is, whether it be a food service employee that is receiving items, in this particular case, we're talking about, again, handling potentially hazardous foods. In this particular case, we're talking about healthcare organizations using individually quick frozen as a best practice. And the interesting thing with this, I can feel individual chefs and that or individuals that think that, well, we would never use individually quick frozen because as far as being able to make sure that the quality is there, we were going to always use fresh chicken. And you know what? That is a good example of the values for that organization. But your policies better be very clear on how receiving is going to receive that, how whoever is going to process it is going to process it when they're handling raw poultry, how that you limit the space and make sure that it's clean and sanitized, give you an example when we talk about clear process here. So one health facility I was working in, they did decide to go from individually quick frozen to raw poultry, which needed to be cut up into strips, whether it be from the standpoint of chicken parts, et cetera, et cetera. No clear policy on making sure, and again, I'm not telling you what's right or wrong. The messaging must be clear if you're going to develop a culture of food safety. The whole idea here is that we're going to focus on what does it take to ensure that we have no outbreaks, that potentially hazardous foods are handled correctly throughout the process. So the procedure must be clear. In other words, if you are going to take on the additional burden of, and again, when I say burden, I don't mean that it's wrong. I mean that you need to make sure that it is clear that if you're going to use raw versus individual quick frozen, that it is clear the steps that are necessary in order for that organization, that operation, to be able to ensure that a culture of food safety is being carried out throughout this process. So now that we understand the necessity of clear policies, clear procedures, and clear process, let's talk about the formal messaging and what is involved as it relates to making sure that it's going throughout the organization. So one of the first things in a culture of food safety, this term orientation, staff orientation and onboarding. And so what we're going to be able to see here is that onboarding makes clear that a new staff member understands the policies, procedures, and processes, and that they are onboarded with the values of that organization. And so when I look at orientation as the process by which the allied staff members are oriented to handling how they handle food products. And we're not talking about obviously raw products, but if when that carton of milk comes to the floor and it's still sitting on the floor or in a patient's room, an hour later, 2 hours later, they need to be oriented to the dangers of that potentially hazardous item in your organization. And so we look at, again, these are all formal messaging. We're going to go into, we're not into informal yet. So we'll talk about the annual training. We're talking about how every food service employee is going to go to the in-service checklist. It reminds them of the organization values. It reminds them of the necessary requirements. You can't have somebody in within your organization or a culture of food safety and they've been working there and they have not been refreshed. They have not received annual training. That is obviously a issue there. So corrective action, retraining, clear discipline action when they are not following. And so when we'll talk about here, we're talking about those that keep, those that do not keep the values. What is the process? And again, just because they didn't get it, it doesn't mean that we're going to discipline them. But if they're going to continue to not operate within the values of the organization, there should be a clear policy relating to all of these different aspects. And so again, as we focus on the message of onboarding with the new, and this is probably the most important aspect of a culture of food safety. You cannot allow somebody, just because they have even 36 years of food safety, to come into your organization and not know. In other words, when we talk about onboarding, we're talking about the organization's socialization process, referring to the mechanisms through which new employees acquire the necessary knowledge, the necessary skills, the necessary behaviors to become effective within that organization membership. And so when we talk about the transfer of, or we talk about the socialization skills, and again, when we talk about culture, and we alluded to this earlier, we talk about how every country has its own values, has its own policies, has its own procedures, has its own constitution. And so the socialization process, even though I'm going to hire a cook or a manager that it cooks well, that's been doing this for 15 years, the process of knowing what our policies, procedures, and values are, it is the onboarding process. So we do that person who has all that great experience that is going to come into our organization, we do them a great disservice if we do not socialize them into our culture of food safety that transform our organization. They become the weak link, even though their experience, their expertise is why we ended up bringing them on board. So the orientation process, we're talking about a formal process again, and we talk about all of our allied members. So now the culture of food safety in the formal sense has left the food service department, and it's now focusing on the allied food safe members of our team. We're talking about within the organization. So when we talk about orienting all of our allied members, you know, so I talked about how the individuals that respond to my blogs, sometimes they work in a lab. They are isolated from the total food service process. Let me tell you, if you have an outbreak, he's going to know, because he's going to measure what particular disease or outbreak that caused it. For them, as being part of your team, to know your process helps them to be able now to be part of the culture of food safety and ensuring that that product, that outcome, is never going to get to his desk, because what he's focused on is that, you know, I'm gonna test that surface. I'm gonna test that counter. I'm gonna test, go in and swab someone's hand, just to reinforce the idea of, you know, what it takes in order for us to continue to be a culture of food safety. So the orientation determines the relationship or the position of that individual and adjusts or aligns each individual or even oneself to this. So in other words, I could be on the quality assurance team. I'm not part of the food safety, but I still need to be oriented to what it is that we need to do in order for us to be able to ensure that we have a culture of food safety operating throughout the organization. So food service ensures that the milk is at 41 degrees. And notice this when we talk about messaging. So the food service department ensures that the milk is at 41 degrees before it comes to the floor or below. But the CNA or the allied, when we talk about messaging now, allied member, when they see that milk still sitting on the counter or on that patient or customer's a nightstand 2 hours later, they understand now that they need to get that milk out of there. Ask that patient, can I get you some cold milk? And listen to the messaging. They didn't say, oh, you can't have that milk because, you know, you're going to get sick from that. No, can I get you some cold milk? And you know, and because when they consume that milk, it's either going to be one or two things. It's going to be nourishing, refreshing, listen to the message, or it's what's going to be used to cause a foodborne outbreak. And so 41 degrees milk does not necessarily taste bad, to be honest with you, but it is definitely potentially hazardous when it comes to someone that already has a weakened immune system. So the formal messaging, when we talk about, again, this is the formal messaging. We're going to get into the informal messaging, which focuses primarily on our allied staff members. And and again, this portion that I'm covering with you now, as far as the formal messaging is concerned, it only relates to 30% of what makes you a culture of food safety. But it's important. So if you notice here, every one of these salads should be exactly the same. This is another very good example of the importance of value and quality and messaging. See, so it's not every now and then. Everybody must go through annual training as a refresher. The checklist must demonstrate clearly that that member did. And to be honest with you, there should be some type of informal testing to show that they took it, that they passed it, it's in their file. In the event that, you know, there was something that comes up, and you can now show that, you know, in fact, that they did go through the formal process, but for whatever reason, they didn't follow through on the consistency to make sure that the values that make us a culture of food safety will take place. So corrective action, retraining, documentation for staffs that are not following policy procedure. See, that's when corrective action takes place. And so corrective action, it doesn't take place because I'm trying to fire you. It takes place because you're not following our values. It takes place because you're not following our policies and procedure. This is what our residents in one facility I was working in, we actually took pictures of that chef salad. And we used that as a tool to make sure that every employee fixed that salad according to what we were, the value that we said that that salad should represent. So, but the further you get away from the messaging, you see there's 4 salads there. The further you get away from the formal message, the further you're going to get away from the standard that makes you a culture of food safety. So clear disciplinary action is necessary as part of this whole process. So, and it must include termination. In other words, it should be clear. Corrective action, it does not mean that you're going to be terminated. But if you continue to not follow the values of the organization, we have no other objective or no other option but to terminate you, because obviously you're not fitting in the culture that we're trying to develop. So as we look at what most challenge your formal message, is it a lack of clearly written policies? Again, I said to you that when we talk about clearly written policies, we're talking about, if you're talking about out-of-the-box policies, those are not clear when it comes to your particular culture. Now, when I say out-of-the-box, if you have corporate policies are the policies that are supposed to filter down through the organization. But when it comes to your local organization and you have different items that it doesn't, that the policy manual doesn't follow, doesn't include, do you have the ability to write in? In other words, when it comes to a corporate procedure, do I have the ability to write in my own values that relate to the organization? And again, you know, you don't just, you're not a lone wolf. So when we talk about a formal culture of food safety, this as a team, as an organization, as allied forces, we all want to make sure that it's clear that, you know, oh yes, we added turkey to our chef salad. So that turkey chef salad, opposed to, say, ham or tuna fish, it has to be handled differently. Do you have the ability to, you know, make that clear? So this one-size-fit-all, if you're doing one-size-fit-all types of policies, again, we're talking about formal messaging. Is that what's hindering your ability to achieve a culture of food safety? A lack of uniform training materials can hinder your ability. No onboarding. In other words, yes, you do have orientation. You do an orientation process. But when I do onboarding in organizations that I go in, there is a formal onboarding process where that individual cannot go on the floor that I manage until they've gone through all the policies and procedures. They sign off I've actually interviewed them to ensure that they understand this process. And then no orientation for the ally staff. Even when it comes to ally staff, I myself even do annual in-service training for departments that are not food service. So this is the question. What most challenges your formal messaging? Is it lack of a clear written policies? Is it lack of corporate involvement? I write my own, or I don't have the ability to input my own? Do you have one-size-fit-all off-the-shelf policies? Is it a lack of uniform training materials? This is a big problem in the industry. When we talk about uniform, as a manager, this is how I do it. This is what I do. And you know what? In that environment, some things I may do very well. And in others, I might fall beneath the mark when it comes to what does it take for me to institute a culture of food safety that reflect on the values of the organization. And then, is it because onboarding is not a process? Or is orienting your allied staff not a process? So, hopefully you've already voted. If you didn't, we're going to keep moving on. So as we focus on the informal messaging, and so what I did was I revealed to you that 70% of the messaging, 70% of the messaging is informal. So, and we're going to talk about how do you, for instance, webinars, articles, I did a webinar on, they had a global hand washing initiative, and we're going to bring this up in a minute, and we're going to use this as an example. And it talked about 7 ways to promote hand washing within your organization. And the goal is that to drive the message through the organization. And so when we look at the areas that are clearly in blue here, it represents the informal messaging. And we're going to talk about some of those things, but the area here, which represents the 30%, those are our policies, procedures, direct training, observations relating to policy procedure. So again, the opportunity to create a culture of food safety rests in your ability to be able to add the 70%. And so when I want you to be able to see that and be able to understand that, is that where we fall short is that we lack the informal messaging that is driving the organization's values. So when we talk about the informal messaging within a business environment, informal communication is sometimes called the grapevine. It might be observed or occurring in conversations or electronic mail or text messaging or phone calls between socializing groups. In other words, what's wrong with doing a webinar internally within your organization to make sure that everybody's on the same page? The goal is that if we're going to be a culture of food safety, everybody needs to know what are the aspects, what are the things that are driving the organization, what are the things that are stopping us from falling short. When you do the first quarter quality improvements, you should do a webinar, or you should do a group meeting that does not require everybody to leave the presence, but to be part of that organization. And just what as P, E, C, and D are doing here, they're recording this. Sometimes it's not convenient for everybody to leave the floor. So we want to create events, and that's really this webinar today. And what I want you to get out of this is that when we talk about creating a culture, the transformation of a culture of food safety, we now want to create events. And every time we get an opportunity to do informal messaging, we're going to call it events. And then so as we focus on these events, um, we're promoting the same formal messaging relating to the risk, but it's in a informal format. And so we're going to talk about, those in a minute. But this process, that I want to be able to be, so again, we're talking about informal messaging. So the communication of events outside of the formal organization structure. Informal messaging is not taking the policies and procedures and then pasting them on an email and then sending them out. We seek to fill the organization gaps. In other words, we need to take a survey. And one of the things that I was experimenting with on this particular webinar is using the survey process to determine where everybody is in the process and what was it going to take to fill the gap. So informal messaging, and let me put it to you this way. There's something else that I like doing as a manager. What we do is very serious business. But if I go to you when we talk about promoting a culture of inclusiveness, and I'm just so serious every single time, when people see me coming, they're not going to want to hear what I have to say. They're going to tense up. They're going to close off. But so I want people to know that when I come, that my message is clear, that we have reached our goal or we need work. And so when we talk about being able to fill organization gaps, it is to create linkage in our allied groups. I talked about that guy that's going to be doing our lab testing. I should have communication with him. I want to know, based on what we do and how we do things, what is the result? I can't do that myself. The example that I use, how global hand washing day events can be used to heighten awareness. And when we talk about informal messaging, that's exactly what informal messaging does. Informal messaging heightens awareness of the culture of food safety. It heightens the message of, have we reached the mark? It heightens the message of, what is it that we need to do to improve our overall goal objectives? So as we look at that, these events are used to heighten awareness of food safety. And when I talk about food safety, again, I'm talking about a culture of food safety. I'm not talking about policies, procedures. These are informal. We talk about educational opportunities. We talk about creating events. We're talking about how to be able to send a message out there that would include other members of our allied group, staff, group members, partners, customers, community. When we want to promote ourselves as a culture of food safety, we don't want it to be just something that we tout ourselves. We want our customers to know how important this is to us. And those things come through, when we reward our employees, we have the opportunity to be able to, let them know how important a culture of food safety is to us. So when we talk about, when I talk about the linkage to the 7 events that relate to how to promote global hand washing, I'm going to give you some examples. And so one of those examples is creating a facility-wide campaign. And this is actual items, and these are examples. So I'm using this for hand washing, but I'm hoping that you would learn to adapt these principles to be able to create and know that quality QA, quality assurance, they need to create a campaign on how to roll out what it means to be a culture of food safety, focusing on 365 days of hand washing, how it saves lives, how, we may, it's been, how many days has it been since we had any sickness or norovirus or anything related to food handling. It's important that they understand that. We want to get the whole facility involved. And so every time we create these events, we're talking about hot dogs or drinks or opportunities for win prizes. We're talking about a total campaign. And anybody wants to know, when I talk about creating a campaign, if you want some information on that, you're going to email me, and I will send you some information on how to create a campaign. So number 2, it says a hand washing challenge. In other words, let's not just be stiff-necked on this. Let's create how one facility or one department creates a funny video on a policy, a procedure, or it doesn't have to be funny, but it needs to be enough that that's going to get people involved, if you understand what it is. So it's a team challenge to the other groups on how and why global hand washing is important. And then the other thing is that we can sponsor community events, involve the other allied groups into this process, reinforcing the values that that show the partnership, that teachable moment, creating those teachable moments that allow everybody else to get involved with this process. So what we want to do is that we want to be able to create events, informal events that basically say to our partners, say to our customers, say to our staff members, the transformation to a culture of food safety is important to us. And so when we say important to us, if all we're going to do is put the policies and procedures out there, then expect people to carry out policy procedures, again, I do understand that, again, the formal process, it's worked for a while. But to be honest with you, this is the reason why the messaging relating to a culture of food safety has become so important today, is because 30% is not enough. Creating electronic email events. So once your quality assurance, or once your food service manager or your food safety team have, created the measures, done an event, use this as an opportunity to create an electronic, and this is what the electronic email event does. The people that missed it, and again, I already brought out to your attention that there are going to be times when it's just not convenient for everybody to be at this webinar. So the recording is an excellent tool that when somebody slows down, or when they get home, or however they want to do it, now they can review their emails and they can see how this event created for us a culture of food safety. Number 5, create an ad or a button or a logo. Again, when we talk about ads or buttons or logos, we're talking about, a logo that represent the first quarter, second quarter, or the fact of your organization, your goal of, transformation into a culture of food safety. Create a button, that people can wear. Let that be a button. Let it be something that's attached to their name tag, so that, it says, ask me, what is a culture of food safety. Let your customers ask your employees. And can I tell you something? If your customers are asking your employees, guess what they got to do? They got to be able to make sure that they know the answer to what their role is in creating a culture of food safety. So this button cannot just be used for a button that can be used with your employees, but it also can be used on your website. It could be used on your advertisements. It could be used on your mail. And it could be everything. You said, again, ask me about our culture of food safety. Because I'm going to tell you something. I'm not going to tell you that food safety is that important, but if I had to go to a hospital, if I had to go to a supermarket, if I had to go to somewhere, I want to know, I don't want to just know that the food is wholesome. I want to know that when I get it home, that the organization that I bought it from, his values, the way it promotes, the way it drives home the message of the importance of a culture of food safety, that assurance is going to earn me additional customers, clients, employees that want to work for us, because I'm going to tell you, when you work in an organization where these values are not espoused, it's a lot of pressure, especially when it comes to annual inspections. And I'm going to tell you, when I said that, as soon as I said annual, all the managers, all the individuals that are used to taking and doing inspections on an annual basis, it sends shivers through your spine, because wow, we passed. But then it comes again. But can I tell you something? When you are operating a culture of food safety, when health inspectors, when survey teams come to your building, it is not a matter of them got you. It's a matter of them affirming that the policies, the procedures, the processes, that what you say and who you say you are, all they doing are affirming. They are not looking to take you down, but they are wanting to assure that the public is safe and that the things that are necessary in order for you to operate and to serve and to do what you need to do as far as regulations are concerned, that they are in place. And it is quite unfortunate. One of the things I do is that I do consulting for organizations when it comes to the preparation and getting ready for annual surveys, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why is because, typically speaking, somewhere between 35 and 42% of all facilities that do annual reviews fail them the first time. And isn't that ironic that the number 30% of your formal program, which is not enough, and the resulting failure rate is somewhere around 35 to 40%, is because formal programs are not enough. And so as we look at this process, we will be able to see, we'll be able to reflect on, and again, there are many sponsors to this global hand washing initiative, which always takes place in October. And again, this is a global campaign. And I would encourage you, if you want to know how to put together a campaign, that you go to the global hand washing, and they have all these resources, these downloads, and you can take these actual resources and downloads and actually use them and adapt them and use them for other aspects other than hand washing within your organization, as far as creating the informal messaging necessary to create a culture of food safety. But I can, and this is the other thing that I want to say about the global hand washing initiative, and I did a blog on it. And
Mr. Larry?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but we are over the limitation time, so if you could please just hurry a bit, okay?
Okay.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
you. Thank you.
Okay. So as we look at this process, we talk about the process of the role of the manager, the role of the quality assurance team. We talk about administration, driving home the values, the message of farm to fork. Talk about the values of quality, promoting quality and safety. This is administrative role. Every employee being involved in the process. Customer service as part of the values of that organization. The community as well as the global community. Talk about the manager's role in the process, creating the rewarding system as far as the expectancy. As far as what it takes to drive this message home. And then we talk about the quality assurance team. We talk about the plans, the monitoring, the coordinating. We talk about developing the training programs when the organization falls short. So we talk about the approval of the corrective action plans. We talk about the communication that is necessary to align your policies and procedures and the values of that organization. So as we focus on the necessity, the role that everybody play, We talk about the allied groups. We talk about the direct messaging. We talk about the messaging as a role. We talk about the roles that each of us play. We want to know more, you know, what it is, what other messaging, what do you want to know more about the culture of food safety and what it takes. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating. I do apologize for being off time-wise. I thought we were starting at 9:30, but I'm going to turn it back over to Susan, and she can talk about the organization. Again, Susan, I want to thank your organization for allowing me to do this webinar. I apologize for the timing, and I hope that it won't hinder us from doing something again.
Mr. Larry, thank you very much for this presentation. I would like to inform that PCB provides training and certification services for ISO 22000 Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor courses. This training is designed to help your organization deliver safe products and show that your organization is committed to excellence in food safety. A PCB certificate will demonstrate your dedication in implementing and managing these processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. I would like to thank Mr. Larry for the presentation once again. It was our honor having you as a presenter. I would also like to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of their busy schedule to join us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. We received all of your questions, and because the time is limited, we will answer to your questions individually by email. Also, don't forget to check PCB's webinar schedule on our website, pcb.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be updated with our weekly webinars. On behalf of PCB and our presenter, we wish you a great weekend. Bye.